It has to do with a date called October 7th. No democracy should allow that, except for one person, Norm Finklestein.
No.
Because he has an irrational hatred of Jews.
Rabbi Schmuely.
No, I don't decide what people should do with their lives.
You've expressed many strong opinions about
election.
Do you think that Hamas should be removed? Well, I think Israel should be removed. No, but I asked you about Hamas. It's not my position to tell people what to do. Answer a question with a question.
Rabbi Schmuely seems incapable of processing very basic facts.
Do you think that...
I will say, I've seen Finkelstein debate. He is almost definitely going to tear this guy a new asshole by managing his optics better, by choosing his words more carefully, and by not sawing the fuck out like some deranged, like, fucking lunatic. Yeah, I don't know. But we'll see.
In principle, Hamas should stay in power?
Answer the question.
Allow me to finish.
Your debating style is to drone on, coma-inducing. That's how you debate. You try to put your opponents into slumber, for God's sake.
How about letting me decide whether it's a simple question?
I don't think you have to be a professor to answer the question. Should Hamas stay in power? Welcome to both of you. Let me start, if I may, with you, Norman Finkelstein. Good to have you back on Uncensored.
Thank you for having me.
We seem to be reaching a point here where something has to give. Either Israel stops obliterating Gaza and killing so many innocent people in the process, or I'm not sure what the alternative is. How do you read where we are with this war?
There are many ways to read it. You can read it politically, you can read it militarily, you can read it strategically, or you can read it from a point of view of human rights and international law, so long as it bears on human rights. Now, when it comes to the very last consideration, I think it's very clear how we should read it. Namely, the International Court of Justice, the supreme judicial body in the world, has said that Israel is under two obligations. Obligation number one is to honor the laws of war in what it's doing in Gaza. And obligation number two, Israel has to provide...
What app do you use for notes? It's called Obsidian. You have to pay $8 a month to synchronize it with your other devices, but the thing itself is free. To just get it on its own on the desktop is free. You have to pay subscriptions to do to upload your notes or to make them public and all that shit. Yeah.
Provide humanitarian aid and assistance to the people of Gaza. Those are its two obligations under international law. The court also ruled that Israel is plausibly committing genocide, and there is no evidence whatsoever, zero evidence, that since the court ruling, Israel has changed its tactics or its strategy in Gaza. So as of now, as we speak, Israel is still, by the conclusion of 15 judges in the International Court of Justice, 15 of the 17 judges, Israel is committing genocide or plausibly committing genocide, and it's not honoring its obligations as they were spelled out by the International Court of Justice.
Okay. Rabbi Schmuely, you tweeted this morning.
Has the ICJ been given that report yet? I thought it was supposed to come. When was the... Hang on. I thought it was supposed to be coming at the end of this month. Or did they give the ruling already? When was the 1 month report supposed to be? 26th was when they gave their ruling, so it's 6 days. It's the end of this month, so it hasn't happened yet. Okay.
When we booked you for this debate, you called Norman Finkelstein an anti-Semite. You said, "You have my word that, God willing, I will digitally decapitate, digitally disembowel, and digitally destroy him." Do you think that was the right kind of rhetoric before you try and debate such a serious matter?
First of all, thank you for having me back, Piers. It's nice to see you. And Norm, I hope you don't mind if I call you Norm. You can please call me Schmuley. Norman Finkelstein is on the show for only one reason. If the journalistic idiom that Jews are news is true, because Israel's this big, it gets this much attention, then how much more so Jewish anti-Semites get the brightest headlights. Norman Finkelstein is the foremost Jewish anti-Semite on planet Earth. He actually attacked his own parents, whose only crime was to be Jewish. Their entire family was annihilated in Warsaw. They're not victims. They hated Germans and wanted them dead. He didn't think to himself, maybe my parents wanted the Germans to suffer to stop the war, to break the will of the German people, to stop murdering, gassing 10,000 Jews per day. His hatred of the Jewish people has extended even...
See, this is so bullshit. Like, this is just a really bad line of attack. Why not just engage him on the fucking points? I feel like you could already poke at a few things he already said. First of all, the ICJ said plausible because the precedent with the ICJ, it seems to be, is that when people are dying and we don't know exactly how all of them died because it's a fucking war, that's like, it's probably good that they take that caution if someone has made the accusation. And also, why don't you ask, okay, if they think it's so likely that it's if they think the case is already really strong against Israel, then why did they not order a ceasefire? You know, yeah, they have ordered a ceasefire for Russia, even though that wasn't over a genocide case. But yeah, again, like, I don't know why you wouldn't just try to, and then Finkelstein might have some pushback to either of those things, but fuck me, like, I don't. Well, we've just gone straight into like attempted character assassination. Like, okay.
Into his own family.
Again, people who care about the issues don't actually care that much about the character of people like Finkelstein, right? That people are watching this because they want to hear about the issues. Oh God.
He calls Israel a satanic state that comes from the boils of hell. He calls it a vandal state. He said that the 15 people murdered in the Charlie Hebdo massacres, he has no sympathy for them whatsoever. But this is the most telling thing of all, and you discussed this the last time. He said, on October 7th, hours after the massacre of 1,200 Jews started, he wrote, "It warms every fiber of my soul to see the children of Gaza smiling as their arrogant Jewish supremacists that have been humbled. The stars above in heaven are looking down. Glory, glory, hallelujah." Let's just go through this. 400 women shot in the genitals, their breasts cut off as terrorists played with their bloody breasts like a football. Glory, hallelujah. Women shot in their genitals, Norm. Glory. You should be a televangelist. Glory, hallelujah. Children burned to death and beheaded. Glory, hallelujah. Come on. You're a fair person, Piers. This is exactly what your friend Douglas Murray said, because he refuses to debate Norman Finkelstein. He called him a sociopath. He said...
This guy is just like the Israeli Cenk, isn't he? Has this guy ever debated Cenk? He must have. What a combo.
Norman Finkelstein is a psychotic. He's not on your show because he's a serious academic. Wolfgang Benz, professor of Ellingen, who was one of the foremost German historians of the Holocaust, said the only thing interesting about Norman Finkelstein is that he needs a psychiatrist.
Okay, well, look.
Professor Wolfgang... Wait, one second. Professor Wolfgang...
I want to just ask you this, though. You see, it's interesting.
Did Finkelstein actually post that? Yes, he did. On October 7th, he did say that the fucking Jewish overlords had been humbled, that it warmed every fiber of his being. Yeah, he did. Yeah, he said all that. Yeah. Because, and then his defense is that he thought that only 50 Israelis had died. Like, what an unbelievably stupid cunt. Like, yeah, I don't know. Or I guess he thought Hamas had only targeted military targets or something. Like, why would you assume that, though? The news headline, within a few hours of the border being penetrated, was 50 Israelis dead, which is a very fucking high number for within a few hours of an Israeli-Palestinian clash anyway. Like 50 of either side dying in a day before October 7th was very like unusual. Like that didn't happen very often. But yeah, because of his experience and his lifelong dedication of research to this topic, he somehow sees that and just assumes, well, it's only 50. It's definitely not going to go higher. And it's also definitely all military targets targeted by Hamas. What a fucking loser.
Norman Finkelstein gave I thought, a pretty measured argument in response to my first question. You've gone ad hominem immediately and attacked the man, not the issue, and not the question that I asked you, which is to respond to what he was saying, which is a growing feeling around the world, by the way, that Israel is now committing, as he put it, as the court said, a plausible genocide. I don't happen to think it is genocide they're doing, but what I do think is happening is that there is a shameful number of innocent women and children being slaughtered on a daily basis, and I don't see what the end game is other than the obliteration of most of Gaza and many people living there. So to answer that point,
So let me answer your question directly. First of all, when you quote President Lula of Brazil, he is a criminal who served in jail for corruption.
Ad hominem.
He has
Let's
zero
go.
credibility. He also knows nothing about history. 10,000 Jews were gassed a day for 4 years after the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. To compare that to Gaza is an abomination. Secondly, Norman Finkelstein is a liar. The International Court of Justice specifically said that Israel is not committing a genocide. So when you tell me, why do I go after ad hominem, I'm questioning his academic credentials. He just lied on international TV. South Africa sued to get the ICJ to declare that Israel's committing a genocide, and they said they're not committing a genocide, and they said they would not stop the Israeli offensive. That is a straight-out lie.
Again, that's not, well, they said plausible, which is probably a good thing for them to do, given the lack of transparency coming from either side on the ground. They said it was plausible, and then they issued a bunch of interim rulings, one of which was not a ceasefire. So you could hold on to the ceasefire argument, but the rest of it was, oh God.
Okay, well, all right. Well, if you're going to call, hang on. No, if you're going to call him a liar, amongst other things you've called him, I'm going to go back to Norman Finkelstein and get him to respond to that.
Would you like me to respond now?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think it's only reasonable.
Optical.
You to, yeah.
Let's go.
Well, I'm not sure what was the purpose to inviting either me or Mr. Schmuley to this program, because obviously we are on two entirely different wavelengths. Mr. Schmuley is in the business, which is not surprising, of character assassination.
Uh-oh.
He's in the business of libel. That's his job.
Bro, me and Norman are sharing the same brain. Look at that. Oh. Uh-oh.
He have to confront the facts, he would be in a very difficult situation. So let me make one clarification. None of my remarks bear on my personal opinions. I simply am repeating what the documentary record shows. Now, according to Mr. Schmuley, I am a liar because, according to Mr. Schmuley, the International Court of Justice explicitly concluded that Israel was not committing a genocide. Now, I would say that Mr. Schmuley...
LonerBox, what about the quote about the human animals will be treated as such, there'll be no electricity, there'll be no water. Again, the problem is, and I hate it when people do this, yes, you can say that this is plausibly a quote indicating some genocidal intent. That's why you say plausible. It's not a silver bullet, okay? Because you look at the preceding sentence, they're talking about Hamas, right? They're talking about Hamas. You'd have to actually see the act, this being translated into a genocide-style act, which is what the burden of proof is on, because genocide is very hard to prove. There are lots of acts that might look like genocide from the outside, but they're actually not. There are lots of acts that might even not look like a genocide initially, but they actually are. People who hinge onto quotes it's so dumb. I don't know, fuck. Again, if you want to just hinge onto quotes, then this is the same argument that Israelis used to say that the Arabs wanted to genocide them in 1948. Because that's what they do, right? They grab 3 quotes from the Arab League or from the General Secretary of the Arab Legion or from Al-Husseini, and they'll be like, look, they definitely wanted to genocide us. That's why our military actions in 1948 war were completely justified, because they would have genocided us, right? That's what they do. But again, they're just quotes. People say all kinds of crazy shit in war. Yeah.
Is suffering from what I would call a Judeo-dementia, because there is no possibility on earth that any rational human being could have read the opinion or the ruling rendered by the International Court of Justice after the South Africa application and after the oral proceedings, there's no possibility on earth that any rational person can conclude that the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel was not committing a genocide.
Yeah, they
So
didn't say that, did they?
we now have two difficulties. Number one, Mr. Schmuley seems to think his purpose to being on the program
How much must I donate for 2 times speed? I don't know. You can just throw me something and see what happens. You know? It depends on how I feel.
is to personally
Then why didn't the ICJ advocate for a ceasefire? I don't know. I don't know why. It could be because they don't think the... it could be just because they think Israel has a right to defend itself and that their military operation against Hamas is at least worth pursuing. Maybe they think that. Or maybe they think that the likelihood of genocide actually occurring right now is too low for them to do a ceasefire. It might also be because maybe they do want a ceasefire, but the problem with the ICJ is that they can't really call for a ceasefire. They can only call for one side to ceasefire. The ICJ can't tell Hamas to stop to cease fire. I know they said to release the hostages unconditionally, but they can't put anything legally binding on that. They have no jurisdiction over Hamas. So there's a lot of reasons they might have said it, but I don't think it's like a silver bullet to let Israel off the hook, that particular omission, but it suggests it might be in their favor. It might be.
attack me, the Latin term ad hominem attacks. Number two, Rabbi Schmuely seems incapable of processing very basic facts. If Mr. Schmuely believes that the International Court of Justice ruled explicitly
He's still hammering.
Israel
Let's
was
go.
not
Shit.
committing genocide, if that's what he truly believes,
He's relentless.
then I would say he's suffering from some form of Judeo-dementia.
Okay, let me bring in.
May I respond?
Yes, you may. Yeah.
Why did you say that, Norman? That was such a good blowout. He hammered on the weakest point that the guy made. He remembered it. He quoted it verbatim. He called out the ad hominems. That was such a perfect debate blowout, and he did it so patiently to probably take up space and time. And then he ends it with Judeo dementia. Oh God. The next time I debate an Arab person, a fellow Middle Eastern, I'm going to accuse them of Arab schizophrenia. Why would you do that? God.
Okay. Thank you, Piers. You know, it's interesting, Piers, that you and Norm are saying that I went ad hominem. No, I did not. I quoted his own words of Jewish anti-Semitism, vitriol, which are so extreme that they're shocking. I told you, he called his own parents haters of Germans. Not the Germans hated his parents and annihilated his family. His parents hated the Germans. But now he just now says, I suffer from Jewish dementia. Notice, it's not Schmuley who suffers dementia. It's always Jewish dementia. It's always Jews. Norman Finklestein has now accused Israel of 5 different genocides. 1982, he accused Israel of genocide in Lebanon. It went on 2006, 2009, 2015. Now, this is the 5th.
Well, Sabra Shatila might have fallen under genocide. That would be a... I haven't read the entire case for the McBride Commission or whatever, but that case actually was made by the UN Commission. Now, whether the genocidal intent came from Israel is not great. I don't know if that's they let it happen, but whether or not they actually... Yeah, they definitely let it happen and they definitely bear responsibility, but whether or not they did it with that intent themselves or whether or not they just wanted some other shit to happen and the Christians were the ones who actually went in with that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Sabra Shatila is not a very easy one to defend from the geno charges.
That means we Jews, I always thought Jews suck at sports and PR. We suck at genocide because we've attempted it 5 times, and yet in all the Arab-Israeli wars, Jews and Arabs together, the numbers that have died, including terrorists, are less than 100,000. Bashar al-Assad next door killed 600,000 in 2 years. We Jews ought to go to him and ask him, how do we finally do this? Because according to Norm, we've tried it for 30 years and we can't do it. In fact, since 1967, when Gaza came under Israeli control, the population of Gaza grew by 1 million people. How is that a genocide? Now, when Norm says that the ICJ said that Israel's committing a genocide, I repeat, Norm, respectfully, you are a fabricator. They said specifically that Israel has an obligation not to. South Africa asked for a cessation of hostilities. They refused. They repeated that refusal last week. How you could get on this
The number is irrelevant when it comes to genocide, though, no? Why is he mentioning this? It is relevant because people have been describing what Israel has done to Palestinians since, I guess, 48 as just genocide. Like, from the entire 48 war all the way until now, calling that genocide. It was like, they've had the resources to act. Like, again, if you compare it to other genocides, like, say, like the Holocaust, where, like, when they actually literally reduced the population of the Jews by a third, that's not a good... It's either that it doesn't exempt them from like genocides happening in different instances. Like there could be a massacre that happens in one war that's a genocide. That can happen. But to say that the Israeli state, has just been committing this ongoing genocide for 75 years, you either don't know what the fuck genocide means, or you do know, but you're a partisan fucking dickhead who's just trying to like score points, I guess.
program and actually fabricate. Well, I guess I know why, because even your mentors, Chicago professor Peter Nozick, calls your scholarship, quote, trash. And this is trash because anyone can Google what we're saying.
Yeah, but Rabbi Schmuely, look, I'm going to jump in again because, again, what you're doing is attacking your other debater here.
He said I suffer from dementia, for God's sake.
Why
don't you call him out on that? Dementia? Seriously?
So passionate.
With respect, what you're not doing is answering the specific questions. There are many,
okay, so I'm going to answer the question. Okay,
there are many people around the world increasingly concerned about the scale of Israel's response.
Genocide isn't about the number. I know it doesn't have to be about, because it's in whole or in part, but you can't say it's not about the number, but then say a state, a fully developed state with a military-industrial complex that has basically almost complete control over another nation, wants to genocide that group for 75 years, but doesn't manage to reduce their population. That would be very difficult to achieve, okay? That would be a very difficult argument to make. To say that, like, for some reason, they control the borders, they control the imports and exports, they've got military control there, they control, like, what food goes in and out, they control the population registry, and apparently this state wants to wipe out this population, or, like, wants to reduce their numbers. Why are they failing to do it? That wouldn't actually make sense, yeah. Again, it's like, there are other crimes you could call that, what Israel does. You can call it apartheid. You can call it definitely ethnic cleansing has happened. Their war crimes have almost definitely 100% happened. Like, yeah, you can make these accusations, but if you want to make the genocide thing, then if you want to say a 75-year-long genocide, especially, not just the one in Gaza, but saying like it's the entire existence of Israel has been genociding Palestinians, then yeah, you do actually need the numbers do matter there. Because given the power advantage that they have, the fact that they have that intention, but they can't reduce their population or stop it from increasing really quickly, that's, you need to explain that. If you're wrong, this is going to look really bad. What do you mean, if I'm wrong? Israel's not on trial for committing a 75-year genocide. The claim is that the war in Gaza is genocidal, that they're committing genocide in Gaza in the war since October 7th. That's the accusation. No court is accusing it. No, the ICJ case is going to hear whether or not Israel has been committing genocide for the last 75 years. That's just not how any serious person uses that word. That's just how, like, retarded activists use the word.
The appalling death toll of children, the appalling number of children also being orphaned, the appalling number of women being killed, innocent women. And they don't see an end game. They just see Israel continuing to bomb, kill. But how does this end? If the next stage is Rafah, which now has 6 times as many people in it as it did 4 months ago, and is a huge refugee camp, and you're trying to find just a few thousand.
Oh my God, why is my chat so stupid? You don't have to be efficient in your genocide, bro. I know you don't have to be. But then you'd also have to explain how this all-powerful, this military industrial powerhouse of the region that wins 4 wars against 5 different countries or whatever but can't commit a genocide against a population over which it has complete control in 75 years. Can't even stop their population from growing. Like, is it they have, like, how simultaneously strong and weak does Israel have to be? Oh my God.
And Hamas amongst over 1.5 million people, then you're going to get even more people around the world saying this is a senseless way of conducting war. Now,
even genocides with like fairly low numbers. Srebrenica massacre. What was that? That was like 8,000 people in what, a couple of days? And that was just in one enclave. That was just in one little area. I don't know. Fuck.
What do you say to that?
I hear you. Okay. In the lifetime of your parents, the greatest statesman of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, fought the greatest evil the world had ever seen. Now, the Americans used something called a Norden bomb sight, and they only bombed during the day, and they lost so many crews as a result. It's a phenomenal new Apple series called Masters of the Air that shows this. The British came to the Americans and said, are you guys crazy? You're sending your pilots to die during the day? And the Americans said, well, we want to make sure we are not hitting civilians. We're hitting military sites with this it was the second greatest invention after the atomic bomb of the Second World War, the Norden bomb sight. That's not what you and the British did. You bombed at night indiscriminately, murdering millions of civilians. So by the definition of Norman Finkelstein, who says that whether you...
Wait, I thought America was involved in the bombing of Dresden. Didn't we learn that recently? Like, okay.
Intentionally target civilians, which Israel does not. Israel loses hundreds of soldiers.
But the whole point,
with surgical strikes.
Rabbi
Wait, no, but I'm asking, but I need to put one question to Norman Finkelstein.
Let me respond to your argument.
Was Britain a terrorist state fighting the Nazis?
Okay,
yes or no?
I will come to
indiscriminately.
Yes,
I'd like to hear his response.
Let me ask Norman that. What I would say to that, for what it's worth, is that there was huge regret over things like the carpet bombing of Dresden, which led directly
to Cologne, Essen, Dresden. Dresden was the end of the war.
By the way,
it was April 1945.
I'm just saying,
let's go to Cologne. Let's go to Dresden. Let's go to Hamburg.
Let me finish.
Yes.
Which led directly to the Geneva Convention to try and prevent these things happening again. Many people think what's happening now in Gaza is a form of that happening again. Norman Finkelstein.
No. What's happening in Gaza is what the Americans did with a Norden bomb site. The Israelis are using surgical targeted strikes.
Well, they're killing a lot of children.
Because Hamas lives under their homes.
If Israel's
builds...
Rabbi Schmuely, with respect, if Israel's being that precise, why is it killing so many children?
Firstly, I want to know what is the accuracy of your numbers, because I trust Hamas as much as I trust... They're complete liars. Secondly, Hamas, unfortunately, wants these children to die because the more...
This guy is just like, I don't think even the IDF would say that what they're doing all the time is surgical. Like, I don't think that's been their approach. A surgical bomb is like, you have a very small munition and there's like a block of flats and there's one guy in one flat and you want to take out that one flat. So you see sometimes those buildings with like one like room just ripped out of it and the rest of the building's just standing normally. That's not what Israel's even explicitly trying to do in Gaza. You can make the argument that it's not indiscriminate, but it's not like they're going for just surgical attacks. Like I don't know. This guy is not selling his case at all. Oh shit. You can even argue that surgical attack isn't even necessarily always the right way to go anyway, because some targets are quite big. And if you try to hit a big target with small surgical munitions, you need more of them. So sometimes it might actually be the case that like one JDAM is going to be less dangerous for collateral damage than like a bunch of fucking hellfires or little things so I don't know. But that's not, neither of those are surgical.
more that die, the more you're going to challenge me on TV. Israel wants them to live. Israel withdrew in 2005. Hamas builds their military installations under these children's homes, under their kindergartens, under their nurseries, under their hospitals.
All right, let me
we
bring
now
in...
found 350 miles of tunnels under children's homes. That's the size of the New York subway system.
I want to be fair to both sides on time. Norma Finkelstein, your response.
What would you like me to respond to?
I suppose the analogy with World War II and the fact that indisputably, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilians died in that conflict. And the argument is it was for the greater good of defeating the Nazis.
He's a fucking debate monster, Mr. Finkelstein. Whoa. Do British schools teach the Bengal famine? No, of course they don't. Maybe they do now, because they didn't used to teach slavery, like the Scottish slave trade, but they do now. So, I don't know why this guy would say that the campaign against Gaza right now is surgical. It's not. Like that's not. They even said that it's not supposed to be surgical. That's what they want. They want to take out that's why they. Like the whole point of them putting the evacuation leaflets over the north of Gaza was because they wanted civilians to get out so that they could basically soften the out of the entire city to make it possible for a ground invasion. And you don't do that's not surgical operation. That's like fucking up. That's like destroying infrastructure and basically making it as easy as possible for your troops to move through without having to worry about people in different buildings or coming out of booby traps and tunnels and shit like that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why he would ever say that the operation right now is surgical. Ugh. Did you see the 9-2 article on the bombing campaign? Yeah, I did, and I went over the bits where it sounded like they were not very honestly quoting the people, like the sources. Yeah, the whole thing about the way they describe power targets in that article is just so different from how power targets are actually defined, by the military. Yeah, I didn't get why they didn't make the effort to show why there's a distinction there. That article does not prove indiscriminate bombing, though. I don't think it does. I think that's maybe also why other outlets didn't really make much use of it. What it does show is that what it does show with that article is it shows that they're willing to be a lot more reckless or a lot more, a lot more tolerant of collateral damage in this war than they have been in past wars. That is true, yeah. That they're not doing it like the NATO standard where you have a capped number of civilians for every target that you can hit. And if you can't guarantee that it's not going to go over that cap, then you just abort the strike. They're not doing I don't think Israel is a lot more tolerant of civilian casualties in this war than NATO have been in previous wars, and then Israel has been in previous wars as well. But it's a difficulty that people like Finkelstein and all that would probably describe cast lead and protective edge as genocides as well. So,
do you see any parallel with wanting? And I completely understand Israel's fervent desire, to eliminate Hamas after what they did on October the 7th, particularly as Hamas has stated again and again, they want to keep repeating it again and again. So, on that particular argument about when you wage a war against whether it's the Nazis or Hamas, a lot of civilians tragically will get killed in the process, but ultimately that shouldn't stop you going ahead with the war to try and achieve your goal. What do you say to that?
What I would say to that is there's a very good reason why this case was brought before the International Court of Justice. That is, as I'm sure you know,
hope for the ICJ that we might get a look into how these calculations are made, because we can't know now what goes on in the war room. Well, that would be really valuable, I think. I know that's what happened with the Goldstone report, was that they were willing to disclose procedures and a few examples for why certain targets that were not Hamas were hit, like the kind of errors that were made in doing that. But I don't know if there is a problem with them doing that during a war, if it like helps the enemy in any way, but I don't know. The IDF spokesperson stated that the emphasis was on damage and not accuracy. Is that not indicative of indiscriminate bombing? Not necessarily, no. It can be. Again, like that's why quotes have to be matched to facts on the ground. So, or even just like how, like that quote could mean they want to be indiscriminate. That quote could also mean that the idea of damage, not accuracy, is that after you've distributed your warnings and your leaflets and you've given people sufficient time to leave the area that you're targeting to prepare for a ground invasion, then you would say damage, not accuracy, because the idea isn't just targeting the Hamas targets, but it's also softening the ground to allow for a ground invasion to go without risking a bunch of booby traps or buildings being utilized by forces on the ground. That would be an example of damage, not accuracy, that isn't necessarily indiscriminate. But I don't know. Fuck. I would be, if the ICJ case does actually show the process for how they're choosing the targets, that would be really valuable, though, because I know I've been told that, and I think this is the case with every army, or every like normal army anyway, is that the with the IDF, like any army, is that when they're conducting strikes and choosing targets, they apparently have lawyers with them basically signing off on whether or not their approach or whether or not their targeting is legal or not. But I'd really wonder how they make those decisions. That would be quite interesting. Like how they decide what levels of collateral are acceptable or whatnot, yeah.
That if you examine what Israel has done in Gaza since October 7th, by virtually every dimension you examine it, the intensity of the bombing, the density of the bombing,
Matrix Dawn, thanks for the
the
sub.
magnitude of destruction of civilian dwellings, civilian infrastructure, the percentage, the absolute number of children killed, the relative number of children killed to combatants killed, the percentage of women and children versus men killed, the number of medical personnel killed, the number of journalists killed, the number of UN workers killed. By virtually every dimension that you examine the conflict, by virtually any and every metric that you examine the conflict, Israel's assault on Gaza, which
This is it. What's he going to say?
we should bear in mind is among the most densely populated places on God's earth, and it has been sealed off from humanity since 2006. As Giora Island put it in March 2004, Giora Island was the head of the Israeli National Security Council. He described Gaza, and I'm quoting him now, as a huge concentration camp. That's not me, that's Giora Island, the former head of the Israeli National Security Council.
Woo, quotes,
So,
let's go.
if you put all of these metrics together and you put in and you add in the context being a concentration camp in which half the people are children, 70% are refugees. If you add in the context and the metrics.
Sorry, again, it's like I know why he's doing this because he's like a propagandist and shit. But like the way that he uses words like refugees and children is that I don't know why he would do that, because he knows that neither of those categories, the way we understand them, are mutually exclusive with being a combatant. I think it's 16 you have to be to join Hamas to actually fight. But do they count as? So they count as children to us, but they don't count as children to Hamas, apparently. They count as well, or they count as children who are fair game for fighting. Or when he says Is it 18 to fight? Wait, hang on. Are you sure? Wait. Join Hamas. Minimum age. There have been reports of children below 15 in Hamas with the lowest recorded age of 12. The process of selection in the Al-Qassam brigades is reportedly long and rigorous and has not to date included children. Oh, so are these guys just Hamas like party members then? What the fuck is a fucking 15 or 12-year-old doing if they're not in the Al-Qassam brigades? PA 18. Is there anything more recent? This is an old. This is 2001. Hang on. What's this? Jerusalem posters accusing them of mini soldiers. What's this? Mini army. United Nations. Let's see what they have to say. What do they say here? Child. United Nations Watch is deeply concerned by Palestinian Authority and Hamas recruitment of Palestinian child soldiers in violation of international law. How would it be? In Scotland, I think you can join the army at 16, right? Yeah, I don't know. Child soldier were used during the Intifada. Okay. I don't know. I thought that was just like a truism. It seems to be here that they... This is saying that the CRC obligates minimum age of 15. So no, you can be it's not 18. Is this about children, or is this just about Hamas's military infrastructure, military apparatus in general? Sheikh Yassin? Oh, this is just about Hamas in general. Okay. What is JP saying? Jordan Peterson, Jerusalem Post. Okay. 50,000 children registered. Published photos of child soldiers they recruited who appear to be under 18. Okay. At least one of the children that authorities in Gaza said had been killed in the fighting was a Hamas member. I mean, they post pictures of this shit all the time, but joining Hamas doesn't necessarily mean you're a combatant. Sorry if that upsets some people, but it doesn't. Like, if you're a party member, you're not necessarily a combatant. Like, as far as the Al-Qassam Brigade's numbers isn't it that they were 30,000 strong by the start of the war? The protocol to which Hamas is not a signatory includes commitments for states not to recruit children under 18. Can women enlist or no to Al-Qassam? I don't know. I don't think so. That would maybe surprise me. In any case, the way he's using that is it's very deliberate. Because I don't think being under 18 exempts you necessarily from being like a military threat or a combatant. The same way that being a refugee doesn't exempt you from being a combatant either. Yeah, like Gaza is majority refugee population because the majority of them are descended from people who were driven in there in 48 or 67, right? Yeah, so. But that doesn't exempt them from being like militants. It's just like propaganda talking points. Although Hamas actually did give a number, didn't they? They actually gave 6,000 for their number of militants dead, whereas Israel said 9,000 last time, so... Hamas have actually given their own number. I wonder if that changes the relative risk according to their number. Original Fedayeen were refugees? Yeah, they were, yeah. Yeah, being a refugee doesn't exempt you from being a combatant. That's just a really stupid thing to invoke. What is this guy saying? I do think this is actually quite a convincing way to look at it, though. I don't know if I've heard a very good argument against this idea of using like relative risk, which is basically the idea that you don't just use civilian to combatant casualty ratios because the nature or the ratios within a particular area might vary. So, for example, if you indiscriminately bomb a target area that is 90% combatants, you're going to have a very good ratio. You're going to have a 90-10 ratio. But if you indiscriminately bomb the same area, but it's only 50-50, you're going to have 50-50 ratio. Or if they are 10% combatant and 90% civilian and you indiscriminately bomb them, then you're going to have a really bad ratio. But it doesn't say, so neither of those three results really tell you anything about the people doing the bombing. It just tells you about the demographics and the breakup of the population. So if you're, rather than going like civilian over combatant, I think what this guy does instead, Avi, is how does relative risk work again? Is it number of civilian casualties over, number of civilian deaths over the civilian population total, and then that as a ratio over or is it combatants go on top? I forget. I think it's combatants would go on top, right? Is that right? What would the formula be for that again? I can't tell what he does. He doesn't give his working. He does. He posts like in every fucking thing he adds like all the entire detail of where he got the numbers from. What are you talking about? That's the working. Combatants on top. So if we go by this data that he's got here, we can fact check anything if anyone disagrees. Because the idea of relative risk would be that if your number was 1, that would mean that it was completely indiscriminate. And obviously the higher the value, the more it suggests, doesn't prove, the more it suggests that you are distinguishing between combatants and civilians. So I think if we go here, it would be civilians killed, it would be combatants killed over combatant population. That would be the first calculation. So combatants killed according to Hamas now is 6,000. Let's just use their numbers. And the Hamas number of fighters in total, I think, was 29,800 since October 7th. So this ratio would be, is that right? Am I doing this wrong? I'm not good at maths. I'll just save that number, 0.2. And then was it for the civilian? Civilian population. So civilian deaths. Okay, civilian deaths, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, we'll use that. Minus the militants. So we would actually say 23,000. Okay, minus the militants. Okay, so we would do 23,000. Should be 23,800 over how many? 29219 6744. 2,196,744. So am I supposed to put 0.2 over 0.01? I don't think I'm doing this right. 20. Okay. That would be it. So if 1 is completely indiscriminate, Israel gets a 20. And then compared to other wars, this is by Hamas's estimates, they're about here. Whereas ones that are genocide tends to have much lower scores. They're much like 1, 3, maybe at the most. There you're seeing at a 2.7. 20 makes it like what, Battle of Jenin, around the same place as Castlead and Protective Edge, a little bit less adhering to the principle of distinction, which would make sense because they've said that. But obviously, that only suggests the entire, like an overall analysis of the entire campaign. It could be possible that they could have a very good score, but there could be one battalion that just goes into a fucking village and genocidally massacres like 2,000 people. Like that can happen as well. So it doesn't get them off the hook completely, but it just gives you like it's a better way to guess than with just saying the number of refugees killed or the like women and children ratio or like civilian combatant ratio, because civilian combatant ratio is going to matter a lot based on how your combatants act, right? Like you can have the same civilian, let's say you have like a civilian combatant ratio in 2 wars and the ratio is like 2 civilians to 1 combatant in both wars. But in one war, the combatants are running to the front line and digging trenches and evacuating their civilians. But in the other war, the civilians can't go anywhere and the combatants are hiding in civilian buildings and doing all their military operations and have all their military infrastructure in civilian buildings. Well, if someone gets a 2-to-1 civilian casualty civilian militant ratio in the first example, then that's probably really bad because the army is making a very strong effort to fight just troop on troop. Whereas in the second one, it would be more understandable. So I feel like getting those two ratios, it would be much worse if you achieved that ratio in the first example than at the second. So yeah. That wouldn't be a genocide because it's not a top-down command if it's just one battalion. No, I think a general or like a militant group can commit genocide. Yeah, they can. And then depending on how it was carried out, the state could still be held culpable for not taking sufficient measures to prevent it. Yeah, that can still happen, yeah. That's why Milosevic, I think, was implicated in the Bosnian genocide, wasn't he? Wait, was he? I thought he was. Not because it was him who did it. It was because it was the Republika Srpska breakaway group that did it. Yeah. But Milosevic didn't take sufficient measures to stop it. Yeah. I think that's why he was implicated, but yeah. Did Hamas commit genocide on October 7th? We don't know. It could be that the intent, like, because again, you would have to prove that the intent, we know they targeted civilians. That's very obvious. You can see videos of them like just literally doing it with like no military target in sight. Yeah. But with the October 7th thing, the argument that if you want to make the argument that it's not a genocide, you would maybe argue that it could have been that they just did it because they wanted to inspire an Israeli retaliation that would get all the Arab countries involved in a big war against Zionism. Like, if that was their reasoning and the civilian casualties were just the means to the end of achieving that, that wouldn't be genocide. I don't think. Whereas if they were doing it with the actual intent of just killing a bunch of Jews, then that would be the genocide. That's where that would come in. At least I think that's how genocidal intent works. Like, it needs to be very specific. But okay, we all good? All right.
There is a very good reason why Israel was brought before the International Court of Justice. Now, Mr. Schmuley has every right to question the authority of the numbers, the figures, and so forth. I am a strong believer in the right of Holocaust deniers to make a case before the public because, as John Stuart Mill once put it, we are all fallible, and being fallible, we have to always have a place in our minds open to the possibility that we are wrong. So, like Holocaust deniers, I do believe that Rabbi Mr. Schmuely should have the right to speak. However, granting that right, he has a very tall order. If a Holocaust denier wants to deny the Nazi Holocaust, he or she has to refute a vast corpus of scholarship attesting.
Does anyone have the clip of him simping for David Irving? I don't. Oh God. And it's not like he didn't know who David Irving was or what he was about. He literally said that he didn't care what Richard Evans says about him. So, and Richard Evans famously took down David Irving in the trial over the Holocaust denial thing. So, he knows the context. Yeah, whatever. Maybe someone will send it to me. Or is it here?
So Tony Greenstein, I agree with him on actually quite a lot. But when he says things like, well, if you call Jews killers of Christ, you're an anti-Semite. If you engage in Holocaust denial, you're an anti-Semite. I think Mr. Wadsworth said, if I understood him correctly, and I might be wrong here, but he opposed the publication of David Irving's Diaries of Goebbels because Irving is a Hitler apologist. I think all of that, the labels like anti-Semite, I don't know if Jews killed Christ or not. Frankly, I don't really care all that much. That doesn't keep me up late at night or exercising me when I get up in the morning. But those are sorts of things which should just be debated, disputed, and you come out with your own conclusions. Did the Jews do it or did they not? When Mel Gibson made his film Passion of the Christ, he seemed to have started off by blaming Jewish moneylenders or the Jews in the temple for Christ's killing, and then he was forced to change the script. I don't see why anyone should be forced to change anything. express your point of view. If somebody disagrees with it, let them disagree. I don't see why one has to get so excited about it. In the case of David Irving, well, David Irving was a very good historian. I don't care what Richard Evans says. He was a very good historian. He produced works which are substantive. And I happen to have read the Goebbels diary, his book on Goebbels. He had stolen the plates, which were stolen the plates of the diaries, and then wrote a book on it.
See, I don't know why you would say that. The whole point of like the whole reason Richard Evans has his reputation when it comes to David Irving was that he went to court to basically prove in court to that because of a defamation trial. Oh, I'll just start from the beginning. Fuck it. David Irving was a big fucking Holocaust denier, crazy but he was also had a bit of a reputation because he always presented himself as the guy who goes to the archives and digs out the actual sources, and he can speak German and all that shit. So he gave himself a bit of a reputation, puffed himself up a lot. But then eventually people started noticing that he was being a bit dishonest about his sources, that he was omitting things, or that he was just lying about things. So he was called a Holocaust denier, and then he sued the person who called him a Holocaust denier in one of her books for defamation. And because it was under British law, she had to prove that he was actually a Holocaust denier. So Richard Evans was the historian who was brought in to present the bulk of the case against Irving's work. And yeah, it was basically found to be that Irving was just like lying about his sources or lying about translations and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's so saying like David Irving's a great historian, I don't care what Richard Evans says, is a really strange thing to say if you know anything about how that trial went. Like David Irving was literally stuck in court, stumbling over himself because he couldn't explain whether or not this gas chamber was actually, in his view, an air raid shelter or a delousing chamber, even though there was a delousing chamber already in the camp that was confirmed to be one. Yeah, it was so bad. There's like the whole exchange where he's saying like, so what was this particular bunker used for? And first he's saying delousing, but he's like, well, there was a delousing place much closer to the main facility that was obviously used for delousing. But this one, where's the proof that this was for delousing? Do you think they had two delousing chambers? They're like, and then he pivots to say there was actually an air raid shelter. And then Richard Evans has to explain that it was like fucking like almost a mile away from the barracks. Like, it's so bad. I don't know. They were just way too far away from the barracks to actually be considered an air raid shelter. Yeah. And he just like, this all happened in court based on his own citations and his own work. Like he just, yeah. And I wonder if that's just a thing that a lot of people do, is that pop intellectuals especially can survive for quite a while just by dragging up a bunch of citations, often from archives or from books that are maybe not that easy for everyone to access, or just misquote things, and you can actually just get away with it for years before anyone notices. Yeah.
To the reality of the Nazi Holocaust. In the same way, Rabbi Schmuely, if he wants to deny that a plausible case for genocide can be made in Gaza, he has to refute a vast body of documentation. And that documentation ran, as it was presented by the South African application, it ran to 84 single-spaced pages with literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of footnotes. Now, that's the first hurdle.
Are we really
that won't
just
allow
gonna
me.
allow-
Footnotes. Shit. To be fair, I don't actually know if Finkelstein does this himself in his books. Again, like maybe one day I'll have a look and take on that project. But in the way that he talks about things and the way that he cites things, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Mainly the way that he described that amnesty report on 22 Days of Death and Destruction. Because he took a report that was already challenged quite heavily, but embellished it even further in his retelling of it. So if he's doing that in interviews, I don't see why he wouldn't do it in his books, but who knows.
Allow me to
Professor,
finish.
Come on. No.
Allow me
You
to finish.
Actually, I might read, because I know that Benny Morris has a dispute with Finkelstein over the 48 War with regards to citations. And that might be a good one for me to look at because I've read at least parts of the books that he would be citing. Oh. That might be interesting.
Your debating style is to drone on coma-inducing. That's how you debate. You try to put your opponents into slumber. For God's sake, you made your point. It's time for me to respond. That's a dialogue.
No,
you
I'm
cannot
not- I'm not
dominate this
done.
debate
I'm not-
like you did with Alan Dershowitz, and you dominated. You took 3/4 of the time. I won't allow it. Now, let me respond. First of all, Piers, I'm glad that Norm has at least had the intellectual honesty to concede the first point. That the ICJ, the International, never ruled against Israel. Now notice he's saying that South Africa brought the case. They lost the case, first point. Because I've been attacking his credibility. For you to say, Piers, I'm attacking him ad hominem.
I don't know why. Oh God, this guy. Why does this guy think he's good for the man for the job? Like he just fucking flails. Why are you saying the case has been lost? I don't think either side feels like they could sincerely say they won the case so far. Oh God.
Personality. I'm not. The question is whether this man is a scholar or not. He has no tenure. He was denied tenure at DePaul University. He is only known because he's a Jewish anti-Semite. Now, number two, this is the 5th time he accused Israel of genocide. He started in 1982 in Lebanon. Now, what does genocide mean? It was coined by a Holocaust survivor in 1947 named Raphael Lemkin. Geno is an ethnicity. Side means murder. It is the murder of an ethnicity. Norm needs to make the case that Israel is slaughtering Palestinians because they're Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims. Well, then how does Israel have 1.9 million totally safe Israeli citizens who vote in the Knesset, an Israeli Arab judge who put an Israeli Jewish president in jail for rape, by the way? Why is that none of the Israeli Arabs have risen up to stop this genocide? Because it has nothing to do with
all right, but let me ask you this. Let me ask you this.
It has to do with a date called October 7th.
Let me ask you this.
1,200 Jews were shot in the genitals, burned to death, slaughtered, and no democracy should allow that, except for one person, Norm Finkelstein.
No.
Because he has an irrational hatred of Jews.
Rabbi Schmuely, with respect, Norman Finkelstein is not the only person seriously concerned about what's happening in terms of Israel's response.
Genocide? Using the word genocide?
I would say the majority of the world right now is concerned about what's going on in Gaza.
Is President Biden and the United
and believes
States?
that Israel's response is now becoming wholly disproportionate. And
the fact that he went to the ethnicity argument is so it can be a national group as well. Like that's the worst defense people give of the genocide thing is when they say like, oh, technically it's not because they're not one of the listed groups in the fucking UN definition. Bro, shut the like, is that really your bet? So it would be if it was just done to a racial group instead of like a fucking, like, I don't know, like gay people. Oh, that's so dumb. Ugh.
Again, I ask you this question. Netanyahu, incredibly unpopular back home in Israel. You know, probably wouldn't even be prime minister now if it hadn't been for this war, given the scale of the social unrest and protests over his attempt to thwart the power of the Supreme Court. So you've got a deeply unpopular prime minister, particularly with Israelis' own people, right, waging a war, and many people cynically think he's just going to keep doing this because it buys him more time. But if I could ask him, and I can't because he won't come on again on this program to date.
Yeah, national identity is listed in the definition, though, yeah.
I'd simply say, when does this end? How many people are you prepared to kill on the other side before you declare mission accomplished? And why would you think, by the way, that killing so many innocent people in Gaza and destroying so much of the homes in Gaza, north and south, why would you think that that would end radicalization of people who may be sympathetic to Hamas? Why would it not have the opposite effect?
When I saw you face-to-face in your studio in London a few months ago, I told you I think that you've been fair on this conflict. So I respect your question, and I want to take it seriously. First of all, Netanyahu's unpopularity means nothing. Churchill destroyed the Nazis, saved Western civilization, and immediately was kicked out by the British. He actually lost the election, as you well know. So that means nothing.
Use them and dump them.
It doesn't mean Churchill wasn't a great man. It means that it means nothing. Number two, let's say, for example, look where I am. I'm in the beauty of South Florida. This is where I grew up. Imagine that 6 million Jews living in Israel say, you know what, we've had it. We've tried this state 75 years. The whole world hates us. They want to kill us. We have people like Norman Finkelstein calling us satanic, saying that we come from a boil of hell. We have Norman Finkelstein saying that he cheered hallelujah when the women were shot in the genitals and raped. So we're going to move to South Florida. They do a deal with Biden. Biden says, you know, it's cheaper for us to just move you guys to beautiful Florida than it is to give Israel. And Israel disappears, God forbid, in a very humanitarian way. No one dies. Now you're left with no Israel. Will that change for one moment, Piers? All of the women in Gaza now under Hamas, the teenage girls who have tires put around their heads, who are burned to death by their brothers because they have sex before marriage. Will it change the fact that LGBTQ Palestinians have their genitals cut off and are castrated? Will it change the fact that any political protests on the part of Palestinians, no Israel anymore, against Hamas, have them shot 20 or 30 at a time by hooded terrorists? Will it change the fact that Palestinian Authority officials, their fellow are thrown off rooftops by Hamas, who did this in 2006 in a coup? Will it change the fact that there isn't one...
Well, it was a counter coup, really. It was a preemptive strike. It was Hamas's 6-day war because actually the United States and Israel and all that and Fatah were trying to do a coup against Hamas. So they were planning on it. Uh-oh. Ugh.
Arab democracy? Will it change the fact that in Syria, 600,000 Arabs, 600,000, Norm Finkelstein doesn't give a damn about them, were killed between 2011 and 2014? Israel is not the problem. Arab dictatorships, tyranny. Would it change the fact that Ismail Haniyeh is worth $4 billion? Would it change the fact that Khalid Mashal is worth $7 billion? It would change nothing. If Israel left the Middle East, the Arab world is still in crisis, killing teenagers, killing LGBTQ, destroying democracy, all dictatorship, kleptocracy. You have Mahmoud Abbas, who's a billionaire. You have Yasser Arafat, who not only died on the...
I don't think Abbas is a billionaire. All right. Oh, God.
Forbes 400 richest men in the world.
He is wealthy,
which is
but he's
shocking,
not a billionaire.
But his wife still lives in...
Is he? I thought his worth was like like 100 million or something. Wait, hang on. Worth? I've never heard him described as a billionaire before. It's 100 million, isn't it? Isn't every fucking page here saying 100 million? 100 million, 100 million, 100 million. Oh, it's in excess of 100 million. So it could just be way in excess. Okay.
In a penthouse paid for by the
He's getting that progressive victory money. True.
Palestinians in Paris. And one final thing. When Norman Finkelstein fabricates and says about the terrible plight of
the article said 4 billion for Haniyeh. You guys oh my God. Not for Abbas. Those are different people. Do you think all Arabs are the same? Oh wait, why is it saying net worth of Abbas, but it's saying Haniyeh 4 billion, 100 million Abbas? No, it's a fucking X. Haniyeh 4 billion, Abbas 100 million. Damn, you got fucking Twitter headlined, loser.
Palestinians in Gaza, they were given about $100 billion
that's
over the past
I'd feel bad if I were you. I'm sorry.
18 years. More that is triple per capita what the Marshall Plan was given to Europeans. Look what they did with it. Germany, France, England. And you know what the Palestinians did with it? With what Hamas? They built tunnels with giant television screens where the Hamas Hitler, Yahya Ayash, is living now with his family. They didn't build one bomb shelter.
Let me go to Norman Finkelstein. Norman, the question I would have for you is this. Do you accept that Hamas need to be removed from power in Gaza?
I would say that the preeminent, excuse me, I would say that the preeminent question at the present moment ought to be, do I accept the fact that the Israeli government ought to be...
Answer a question with a question. What a dude.
...removed from power.
Well, hang on, that's a different question. No, with respect, that's a different question. I can
ask
you that separately. The specific question I have for you, particularly given what you said after October the 7th, is simply, should Hamas remain in power?
Don't send a rabbi to do Piers Morgan's job.
Should Hamas remain in power? I think that the Palestinian people should be able to determine their own future and determine their leadership. That's just the basic democratic
What is your
principle.
personal opinion?
Now, No, I don't decide what people should do with their lives.
You've
I don't
expressed many
decide
strong
what their
opinions
leadership
about.
should be.
Hang on.
Why is he saying about Israel then? Do you think that Hamas should be removed? Well, I think Israel should be removed. No, but I asked you about Hamas. It's not my position to tell people what to do. You live in fucking America, bro. Damn. Finklestein is a pretty incredible debater, I will say. He's a very good debater. He made a fool of this guy. But what he wasn't prepared for was the honest, salt-of-the-earth, simple man wisdom of Piers Morgan, the British homespun philosopher. Straight to the point, Mr. Simple As.
Hang on.
Norm, when was the
Rabbi
last
Schmuely,
election
I
in
can do an
Gaza?
interview, thank you. Finklestein, the problem I have with that response is
Let him
you're
talk.
very quick to level the charge of genocide at Israel, and many people would agree with you, many wouldn't. But you're not so keen to be held to account for your view about Hamas. And I don't see how anyone,
think
after
that's-
what they did on October the 7th,
Piers,
could possibly conclude they should stay in power.
Piers, I don't want to have to redo the interviews you did with me. I was very clear about my opinion when you asked about October 7th. I was also very clear as to what I believe Hamas should or shouldn't do regarding its leadership or its current power in Gaza. I've not tried to evade any of your questions.
For those who,
But
Norman,
Piers,
for those who may not have seen the previous interviews, for those who may not have seen our previous
fine, then
conversations, I simply
That's
ask
fine,
again.
that's fine.
It is a
Piers,
simple question.
okay, that's fine.
Should
Simple
Hamas stay
question
in power? Because
for a
Israel's
simple
whole
man.
argument is that they have to keep going with this warfare to eradicate Hamas. And my question for you is, do you think that in principle Hamas should stay in power?
Well, Piers, I'm going to answer you because I never fear the truth, and I'm not going to try to evade your question.
Uh-oh.
Let's take a simple metric. We'll take the question of children killed.
Oh my
On
God,
October
answer the
7th,
question. Should Hamas stay in power or
No,
not?
These are different. These
Answer
are
the
answers to
question.
different questions.
Just answer the question, Norm, for God's sake. You said you don't want to evade the truth. Should Hamas stay in power or not? Answer the question.
Piers,
Oh, the rabbi's been saved.
either you're going to moderate the program or there's honestly no point in continuing.
I do think it's
You
a very.
have to
I have to
decide.
say, I do think it's a very simple question, and it goes right to the heart.
No, it's not.
It goes right to the heart of Israel's argument about
okay.
why they are continuing
Piers.
to execute the war.
Piers, how about letting me decide whether it's a simple question? How about letting me decide?
Well, either Hamas
So I'm
stays
going
in
to
power or
make
it
a-
doesn't, doesn't
Okay.
it? I don't think you have to be a
No,
professor to answer the question.
Piers, there's a difference between whether or not Hamas stays in power and whether Hamas should be in power. So let me get into the stays in power is a military question. Should be in power, well, let's look at it. I say if Hamas, which is responsible for the killings of 36 children on October 7th, should not stay in power, then you must certainly agree, Piers, and I'm going to kindly ask you to please answer me. You must surely agree then that Israel, which has killed now approximately 12,000 children, and is plausibly accused of having killed them in the course of a genocide. Now, I'm going to ask you, Piers, to
What is
please
your source for
answer
12,000
the
children? What's
question.
the source? What is your source, please?
Okay.
What's your source?
Well, it's the
Piers,
Palestinian
please
Health
tell
Authority
that-
run by Hamas. We know that.
Run by Hamas. Wait. No,
No,
answer
Rabbi
the question,
Schmuely,
Norm.
you
You're a
don't
scholar.
interrupt. This is actually an important question and an important moment in the debate. Continue, Norman Finkelstein.
So I have to ask you, Piers, if you believe that Hamas should not stay in power because it killed 36 children on October 7th, then you must surely agree several times, 1,000 times more emphatically that the Israeli government should not be in power because it killed 12,000 children, not as collateral damage, but plausibly, according to 15 of the 17 judges on the highest judicial...
Wouldn't it just be worth finding out about the plausibility, though? What if they were? What if it was collateral damage? Should the Israeli government stay, according to Finklestein? I thought, even if it was all... I don't think you need any fucking dead children to say that the Israeli government has to go, right? You don't need any... Like, before October 7th, the Israeli government had to go. I don't know. That word plausibly is really fucking keeping them above the water there.
Body
okay, yeah, you said that point. Okay, here's my answer.
Plausibly,
here's my answer to you. Here's my answer.
And a genocide.
Here's my answer. You haven't so far answered my question. If you do, I will give you an emphatic answer to yours. So let me just ask again, should Hamas stay in power?
My answer is, if we apply one standard...
that's not an answer.
Yeah, but the thing is, you wouldn't apply... Is he saying that Hamas should only go because of October 7th? Is that the only argument? I don't know why he's injected that standard himself. It's like, not every government has to go because they killed a bunch of people, right? Like that's like saying that fucking, should the Ukrainian government go because they've killed a whole bunch of Russians? Or I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. Or should the Allied governments have been kicked out because they killed a bunch of German civilians? Like, oh God. It's like, I don't really know why you're injecting that parameter. I feel like for both governments, the Netanyahu government and the Hamas government, both of them should have fucked off before October 7th. Like, I don't think that's what it doesn't really have to do with either of those. But,
across the board.
No, that's not an answer.
If we apply one standard across the board, I am perfectly happy to say Hamas should be removed from power if you agree that several thousand times
you've made that point.
more
Here's my answer.
emphatically the Israeli government should be removed from power.
I think there are two completely separate questions, and I would answer it like this.
No, they're not.
Well, I'm going to explain to you. I'm going to explain why I believe they are.
I will listen.
Because Israel's response was a response to an appalling terror attack. I believed after October the 7th, Hamas rescinded any right to continue having any power over Gaza and should be removed. The only debate would then be, how would that best be done? And I have serious question marks about Israel.
Even that, like, I don't know if that's a hard thing to say as well. As far as Hamas rescinding their right, why did they not rescind it when they were abusing the fuck out of their own people over like tax issues and economic stuff, or when they were like clamping down on protesters and torturing their political opponents? And like, why was that not a good reason to? But they only rescinded it after October 7th. I find that a bit weird. Or like commandeering fucking aid and civilian infrastructure to just use as like for a military base, like not necessarily with the consent of the people living there. Yeah.
Response. In response to whether the current...
hang on.
Let me finish my sentence, please. And in response to your question, Norma Finkelstein, about Israel's government, no, I do not believe they should continue, actually. I think this government has lost the faith of its people. I think Netanyahu in particular has lost all confidence and popularity with the Israeli people, who blame him for what happened on October the 7th. And so, no, I don't think they should stay in power, actually. I think both countries should have new leadership and new governments. That's my answer. But again, I'll just come back to you.
Norm is saying,
hang on. I don't equivocate either with the other. You can divorce the two questions. You can say, after October the 7th, should Hamas stay in power? Yes or no? And then you can have a question mark about whether this current Israel government should stay in power because of the way they responded. They're two different questions. But you, Norman Finkelstein, so far... Well, hang on.
Piers,
Wait a second, Rabbi Schmuely. I just want to get one answer out of Norman Finkelstein as to whether you will answer my question about whether Hamas should stay in power.
Piers, if you use a single standard across the board, then I accept your conclusion. So long as you're being morally as well as legally consistent, I have personally no problem with that conclusion.
It's just regurgitating the same fucking...
However, I would want to say, Piers, and I'm trying to be honest, but also intellectually consistent in this matter. You said that Hamas disqualified itself from leadership because of the atrocity that was committed, or atrocities that were committed October 7th.
Yes.
Now, if you agree with the head of the National Security Council of Israel at the time in 2004, that Hamas is a huge concentration camp. I'm quoting him now.
Gaza, you mean?
Would you also agree that October 7th was a reaction to confining 1 million children in a concentration camp?
Okay, Piers, he's not answering your question. He never will. But Piers, I have to be fair.
Let me bring it.
Oh god, the concentration camp thing is so stupid as well. Like, what other? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a whole bunch of people, like on Twitter over the last couple of weeks and months, have been posting all these like montages of like, look at how Gaza was before the war. Like, it's just like, and it's just all these videos of like picturesque kind of scenes of people like maybe outside one of the mosque buildings, or people at the beach, or people just like fucking doing Christmas from the year before, like all that shit. And then look at it now. Like, would anyone ever say that about a concentration camp? Like, look how people were living. Like, look how people were trying to get on with their lives and living like peacefully in this concentration camp. Like, fuck me, I don't know. I don't think people would ever try to make that argument. Like, I don't know why you would try to invoke like a particular, like a structure, like an institution or a complex that's built to push in political prisoners, ostensibly killing a bunch of them or letting a bunch of them die of disease where they have no political rights and no human rights, versus like an enclave that has been basically stateless since the 1940s, was first occupied by Egypt, then occupied by Israel, then eventually closed off into the like 2000s because of like Hamas fucking firing rockets at Israel. So I don't really know, like comparing that and all its complexities to a concentration camp is just so like juvenile. Like, I get people saying if an activist says like open air prison, I get that because people can't leave. Like it does evoke that like emotional response and everything. But when people say concentration camp, I just feel like, I guess it's like open air prison just isn't good enough for them. I don't know. Eesh.
Rabbi Schmuely, because you've been waiting patiently. More patient than you normally do. So
every time, there's one main reason I wanted to do this debate, and Piers, thank you for having me. I'll tell you what it is. There were 6 million Jews who were turned into ash and lampshades and shot, and they're in, graves. They have no voice. Their only tomb is our memory. Norman Finkelstein is a Holocaust denier. He has said that David Irving, the #1 Holocaust denier on earth, who Britain despises to their credit, who lost huge against Deborah Lipstadt, he said he's a great historian. Every time he calls Gaza a concentration camp, as if there's gas chambers there, as if there's SS Einsatzgruppen going around shooting Palestinians, he denies the whole. He is a Holocaust denier. Now, why does this matter?
Ooh.
Because why won't Norman Finkelstein answer your simple question about whether Hamas should stay in power? And don't tell me this is ad hominem. In 2016, he gave an interview where he said that he essentially makes his income through giving speeches. He said that he gave 40 slips to his accountant for speeches against Israel.
That doesn't mean he doesn't mean what he says.
No, wait 1 second. Hold on.
He doesn't mean he doesn't mean what he says.
No, 1 second. Hold on. If he attacks Hamas, He said that his speeches went from 40 to only 4. He'll be down to 0. Now, here's the point. You're right. It doesn't mean that. But when you pressed him in your first debate, and you did so admirably, Piers, hours.
This guy is such a fucking soy lord. Okay.
Parents stayed at my house for the past 10 days. She was the woman who, within an hour or two of the attack, the German-Israeli woman, was put dead, shot in the head, stripped naked. I maintain that she was the most desecrated woman in world history in terms of how many people saw her naked body. As that was happening, Norman Finkelstein wrote, "It warms every fiber of my soul," about these scenes in Gaza. And glory, glory, hallelujah. Now, to your credit, you pressed him on this in the first interview. And you know what he said? He said, "I had no idea. I only thought 50 Jews had died. I didn't know 1,200. So 2 questions. Number 1, Norman Finkelstein, how many Jews need to die before you are no longer celebrating their death and saying, glory, hallelujah? Is it 51? Is it 500? You know, one black man was murdered in Minnesota. His name was George Floyd, and tens of millions of people marched against his murder. God bless them. But
this guy is such a fourth-hand car salesman. What? I'm just getting Jewish jank. That's what I'm getting. Jank the rabbi.
for you, it would have had
all the same mannerisms.
other dead black men before they start marching. Number 1. Number 2, what you're confessing, Norm, is that you are a joke of a historian. Because your defense to Piers Morgan was, I didn't know. I have 3 people who do my Twitter. I gave it to them. By the way, I'd love to know even one name of those 3.
It was on his Substack. It wasn't on his Twitter. That whole rejoice, it was on his Substack. What was the title of the piece? October 7th.
I dare you to mention their names because I'd like to question them.
John Brown's Body in Gaza.
Fabricating that as well. I think you wrote this yourself.
Yeah, this was it. He's not denying he wrote this himself, is he? There's no way. It's in his Substack. Better to die on your feet than live forever on your knees. For the past 20 years, the people of Gaza, half of whom are children, have been immured in a concentration camp. Today, they breached the camp's walls. If we honor John Brown's armed resistance to slavery, if we honor the Jews who revolted in the Warsaw Ghetto, then moral consistency commands that we honor the heroic resistance in Gaza. I, for one, will never begrudge. On the contrary, it warms every fiber of my soul. The scenes of Gaza's smiling children as their arrogant Jewish supremacist oppressors have finally been humbled. Like, it's just such a, how can you devote your entire life to researching this topic? And if your defense is that you thought that only 50 Israelis had died in the process of Hamas targeting military targets, like, what a lack of understanding you have to have of Hamas, of what 50 dead in a few hours means in the context of that conflict. The stars above in heaven are kindly looking down. Glory, glory, hallelujah. The souls of Gaza go marching on. What a fucking tool. All right.
You did not give it to 3 people who work for you on Twitter. But here's my question. You claim to be a serious historian. What kind of serious historian, before they even know the facts, says, I love seeing dead Jews? You admit you knew nothing. You say that you had no knowledge, and you were saying, glory, hallelujah, may more Jewish women be shot in the vagina and have their breasts cut off. Now, later when Piers Morgan said to you, hey, Norm, at least take it off. At least delete it. You now admit 1,200 died. And you know what you said? It's part of the historical record. So you are a fraudulent...
That's true, actually. In 1,000 years, Norman Finkelstein, historian who's not even a pop historian, I guess, celebrated October 7th. That might be all right, actually. I wouldn't mind seeing that in when I'm reading a 2050 history book. I don't know. I want to hear a Finkelstein defender defend that. Like, fuck. I need a Finkelstein defender to explain to me why that isn't absolutely fucking insane. Jesus.
historian, by your own admission. You said this fraud that you are thrilled that Jews were shot in the vagina, women were gang raped, is part of history, but it's a false history. So, to be fair, Piers, when you tell me ad hominem, come on.
Are there any? I know there are Finklestein fans who watch this stream. Yeah. I got all kinds of wacky duders in my community.
Man either has credibility or he has no credibility.
Okay.
He has no tenure. Yeah. Okay.
Let me give the final word to Norma Finkelstein.
The issue before us is Gaza. It's not me. Now, there is a temptation, obviously, on my part to defend my professional honor and my personal honor, but I am going to forego that. I'm going to withstand that temptation and end on
Redfit, man, thanks for the tier 1 sub.
Conversation began and was supposed to continue. And so I would say that if you are indicting me, then you are also indicting the sanity of
Israel.
the 15 judges on the International Court of Justice, including, quite surprising to me, including the American judge. Now, if you examine the proceedings closely, which I did, each judge had the option of including in their decision what's called a declaration. And the German judge did exercise that option and wrote a 5-page declaration in which he distanced himself from certain of the findings. However,
he's so good at moving the conversation onto whatever he wants to talk about. He's so good at that. Because an ICJ judge saying that some of the evidence against Israel could plausibly be indicative of genocide,
cuck bastard,
but also don't do a ceasefire, is the same, is even in the same planet as what he said on Substack about October 7th on the day. But he's just managed to wriggle the conversation into that direction. He's so good at that. Uber, thanks to the $5. He might have said that, but at least his taxes folder is clean. Hey, good one.
it was very noticeable that Israel's main ally in the world, the judge from that country, the American judge, did not issue a declaration, which is to say, she went along with the conclusion without qualification, that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. Now, I would want to end on the note, as you know, Piers, genocide is the crime of crimes under international law.
Mm-hmm.
To be plausibly guilty of the crime of genocide, it's a very, very high standard, a very high standard. And
I feel like I got mixed opinions of this. So I don't think it's a high standard in a war for the ICJ to take the case seriously, just like, because it would make sense just to exercise like that level of caution. Yeah, but I'm not too sure about that. I don't know if has there been a big history of like genocide cases being brought against the ICJ and they just throw it out immediately? Does that often happen? It's actually the lowest standard possible. Well, yeah, because for genocide to be plausible, really, all you really need is for people to die. Like in any war where people have died, genocide is a plausible cause for some of those deaths, at least some of them. Like, you're saying not one ICJ case was ever dismissed. I didn't know that.
it seems to me require a very high degree of dementia to deny
you mean Judeo-dementia?
That crimes of on a vast scale
Judeophrenia
are occurring in Gaza.
Fuck's
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to leave it there.
That is a blood libel. That is a blood libel. It's a lie. The ICJ never said that. That is pure blood libel. Norm, you may as well say that we Jews mix blood into of Christian children into our matzahs, poison the wells of Europe. You are guilty of a blood libel. The ICJ never said that. They ruled in Israel's favor. You, sir, are a liar, and you are guilty of a libel against your own people and against your own parents. Your parents were not haters. They were victims. They did not hate Germans. The Germans hated them and tried to murder them.
Rabbi Schmuely,
your parents' memory and apology.
We're going to leave it there. Norma Finkelstein, Rabbi Schmuely, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Toxic soy rabbi.
Well, thank you, Piers.
Well, that was a fucking waste of time. Didn't learn anything. Okay, good. I'm glad at least Norm was exposed as a nut job in front of more people. Yeah, why not? Is Destiny really debating Finkelstein? I think he is before the end of this month, isn't he? How do I feel about it? Fine. Feel excited. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to soy out. I'm going to bounce around in my chair. It's on Lex. I kind of... hats off to Benny Morris as well for knowing that his debate partner is Destiny, like a fucking streamer, and just going for it, you know? I wonder if he did any research deciding to go into that. Benny Morris, I mean, if you ever watched any videos to decide if you wanted to. Thoughts on Mustafa Barghouti? I think if Palestinian leadership were, more of them were like him, I think the world would be a much better place. Yeah. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think he's very admirable. It must be quite difficult to be a non-violence advocate in fucking Palestine as a politician. Yeah.